Hello, everybody. This is Catholic Dad, episode number 463. When liberals become conservative. So my old man, he was a ghetto cop in the South Bronx, and he used to tell me the most conservative person you'll ever meet is a liberal who's been mugged. Essentially, they're well intended and they want to help the world, but when violence comes to them and the real world smacks them in their face, their idealism goes away and the realism takes over. And suddenly they become, pro-cop and pro-law enforcement and, need to crack down on crime and drugs and all sorts of other stuff. They go from the chaotic world when they're mugged to the ordered world. So they go from liberal to conservative. Now, this whole COVIDian thing that played out and all the hysteria of the world and wokeness and in the last couple of years, there's been some prominent liberals who have become conservative, or at least are speaking that way. Joe Rogan is probably the most popular example. And then, Jordan Peterson is even more conservative than he used to be. Naomi Wolf is more conservative than she used to be. I don't know if you know Naomi Wolf, but she worked under Obama, and now she's like the leader of the anti-vax freedom and liberty movement. So how do liberals become conservative? And essentially you got to mug them, right? That's what my father said, and I think it's probably true. And I think what happened was, and by the way, this is a warning to those who say that they're liberal, but they've become more conservative. Del Bigtree is another one too, by the way. He started out as a progressive Democrat, and now he's like Mr. Conservative, even though he still claims his roots as a Democrat. But he can't really affiliate with the party anymore. The funny part is these people are hyper intelligent. Like all of them are very intelligent. And the funny part is they've arrived at this decision that the liberals don't necessarily have their backs when they're like 50 years old, right? And I arrived at this decision when I was about 4 years old or 5 years old. And so what's the difference? And I think I figured it out, actually. So the Catholic Church teaches about a principle called subsidiarity. And I'll explain this one to you. Subsidiarity, and I've stated it before, but please follow me on this. Subsidiarity is the principle that all problems should be solved at the lowest possible level. And the levels include, self, your family, your church communities, your community, your municipality, your state, the federal government, world government, you name it. And so if you could solve a problem at the lowest possible level, it's good for society to do such things. Like if a Catholic dad has a problem with, drinking too much beer or driving too fast, or he needs to work on it himself. And if he can't solve that, then he has to go to the level of the family. And if he can't solve it at the level of the family, then he's got to go to the priest in the church, and he's got to work on these things to help solve the problem. You don't want to there's an old statement, you don't want to make a federal issue out of something that's small. So for example, like if somebody has prostate cancer, that probably shouldn't be a federal issue. Like somebody's prostate cancer in Maine should not be somebody's problem in LA County. Somebody's toenail fungus in LA County probably shouldn't be somebody's problem in Maine. And I think what progressive liberals, in their very nature, right, in their very nature, they, in their thought process, they violate the issues of subsidiarity. They always want to go higher and bigger with the issues, right? And so these people, like the Rogans of the world and the Del Bigtrees and the Naomi Wolfs of the world, they always say something like, I think government should do good, the health care for all, and, the problem is these things violate the issues of subsidiarity, and it concentrates powers at the upper echelons of government. Well, anyways, so they're all for this when it's to their advantage, but when it turns on them, right? Suddenly, like they don't want to get the vaccine, but the government's making decisions about your vaccination life. Suddenly, you turn around and say, well, maybe they don't have my vested interest. I just want to point this out to progressive liberals, because if you suddenly come to the decision that maybe the Democratic Party or the progressive liberals or the federal government, for that matter, they don't have your back when it comes to certain issues, and therefore you're going to distance yourself from them. You got to realize that you're the problem, right? You're the one that actually created those institutions through your support of the big progressive programs that actually empowered the people that eventually oppressed you in your daily life. People like myself who tend to be like wicked conservatives, I think the point being is I never want issues to go higher than they need to go. I was born with an ingrained sense of subsidiarity. If you have a problem, you solve it yourself. And if you can't solve it yourself, you go to your family. And if your family can't solve it, you go one step higher. You never go to your congressman or your governor, or you go higher and higher and higher to try to create the institutions of solving a problem. And so And the problem with this is that, like the Del Bigtrees of the world, which I love the guy, Joe Rogan, I think he's wonderful, Naomi Wolf, I think they're all wonderful, and they're doing great work with this COVID thing. But if they don't turn the switch in their head and realize that they're offended when the power structure offends them and they want to stop it, but they don't change the power structure and realize the reason why that power structure exists is because of people like them who violated the issues of subsidiarity and passed the power hierarchy up the ladder to empower the government, which was the eventual oppressors of them. That is always the case. The people who want to seize power will always seize power when given power. And therefore, if you have a population of progressive liberals, you will always end up with issues of tyranny and oppression, because they will always hand authority to those who want it, those who say they could solve the problems for the greater masses. And we live in America, and we formerly had a constitution where people actually kind of respected it a little bit. The founding fathers said that you need to chain down the politicians with the Constitution, meaning their political ambitions. And another way of saying that is the violation of issues of subsidiarity were chained down by the law, that they couldn't actually accomplish anything that they wanted to accomplish because the law and the Constitution was there to actually stop them. And if we paid attention to our Constitution and we paid attention to the issues of subsidiarity, the crap that went on in this country in the last 3 or 4 years, in the world for that matter, would have never happened. Like, could you have imagined back in the 70s them saying we have this experimental gene technology that we're going to inject into your arm and you have to take it or you're going to lose your job? Everybody would have blown a gasket about that, because that violates the personal freedom and the issue of subsidiarity of healthcare, which resides in the individual. And I'll get a little more political on this. Our Constitution, in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, spells out what the federal issues are. It's called the powers of Congress, and these things are very simple. It's things like coining money or building post roads, not even roads, but post roads. Things like building armies and navies, calling upon militia, patent laws, rules of naturalization. Really, that's all the federal government is empowered to do by the Constitution. And the Founding Fathers went one step further, and they created something called the 10th Amendment that said any power not specifically delegated to that of the federal government is a power of the states or the people. Meaning if it ain't in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, it's not a federal power, and then the federal government can't partake in it. If we followed those rules and regulations, we wouldn't have had any issues the last 3 years. The federal government couldn't have handed down all these shutdown orders and edicts and everything else, and then people would have been able to make the decisions for their communities following issues of subsidiarity, or the principle of subsidiarity. And so I guess that's my point for you. If you're a progressive liberal, or you were in a former life, okay, and you've come to the position that perhaps the progressive liberal agenda has been offending you and you're kind of turning over to being more conservative, realize that it was an issue of subsidiarity and you were part of the problem to begin with. You were the one that actually empowered the state to take control and authority over your bodies. So, in summary, the most conservative person you'll ever meet is a liberal who's been mugged. I think that one holds. But the most conservative person you'll ever meet in terms of the political class of people is a progressive liberal who has been tyrannized by the very institutions in which they created. And so I think there's a role for conservatives and liberals in the world. I must say that, but they all have to follow the issues of subsidiarity. And I always like to say that I'm a liberal in my house. That my house is small. It's not going to hurt the society if I make the wrong decisions. And so I will give to the needy in my house. I will ask those who can work hard to work harder. I will ask my children to live up to their potential in my own household. And if a child's not able to do it, then I will give freely out of my own pocket. That's called charity and family. It's good, it's good to be a progressive liberal in your family. But it's not good. Once it leaves the household, it doesn't scale well. It creates tyrannical, oppressive governments. And well, anyway, this is Catholic Dad making you think about it. Please like or subscribe, get the Mass, and pray the daily rosary. Thank you. God bless you all, and have a great Easter season.